This is a conversation I had with Alex Bereznyak, Central Animation Technology Director at Activision Blizzard King. Alex just gave a talk at SIGGRAPH 2024 going over his new technology called Hyperpose. Hyperpose is a unique solution to the problem of animation in games. Things like unrealistic motion, foot sliding, motion tiling, anything that'll pull the player out of the experience. Let's get into it.
First of all, thanks for having me. Second of all, I don't think I'm leading much, and there's a bunch of people who are trying all sorts of different things, and so I just enjoy being one of them and learning from a ton of people who are way better than me, or people who establish things that we learned. Because I don't think either of us is the first generation video game developer, right? Like if you think way back to Donkey Kong and stuff and arcade machines, so we're just trying to do our best. Hyperpose is a prototype right now, right? So it's not something that shipped the game, and until it does, it's probably more honest way to say that this is something that we're working on developing, but it is a prototype thing. We are not attaching any title to it. Eventually, somebody is going to go in GDC and mention it in a passing that this is how we shipped our whatever, right? But the core part in there, and the reason we call it Hyperpose, is just the idea that we're so used to scroll through the timeline, and if you sort of compact all of these poses and you overlay them, you're starting to achieve to look at something that is can be compared to a pose with extra dimension, right? Where it's like a flip book, right? So we overlay all of that. We get this character pose with extra dimension, and now we can do some kind of cool stuff with it, right? And so while the core concept of the Hyperpose is that the tangent, branching threads probably is the best way to call it. We started to look into, well, what else can we do with that thing? Because it kind of looks interesting. And one of them was about cloth, which is, the way that I describe it to keep things simple is just like wrinkle maps, blend shapes. It's like optimized alembic, right? We pre-calculate things, but we only store them on several poses, which repeat quite a lot. And we sort of blend between this. And it's like stupid simple. There's nothing like innovative there. It's just that we use this approach. And I would say the results are actually looking really good. And because you pre-calc stuff, you don't have to deal with the common problems like pinched cloth or layered cloth. Because if we can solve it on side of Glow 3D or Marvelous Design or Houdini, then we're just going to play it back. Now it does come with a ton of caveats because we want some things to move in the game based on the wind and whatever else.
Right.
And that's where we go and we say, well, by the way, we can also calculate distance to the body. And so I know exactly how far something is, and that's exactly how far it can be moved. So I can still apply vertex shader on top and whatnot. Another thing that we sort of stem from the same concept is called Echo, and that one is about stylization. So if I throw myself in mocap suit and I walk around for a bit, and then I do the same thing with my wife, who is very different physically than me. The interesting thing about the way that we concatenate poses is we find the poses very similar to the way that animator would, in like segmenting. And, when they work on 4s or 8s, like a keyframe every 4 frames, every 8 frames, they sort of tend to choose the same moment in, say, a walk cycle, right? So
Sure.
If I can choose moments this way for me and for my wife, I can actually pick up on the same stage of passing pose or plant of the footstep in the walk cycle, and I can see what's different between them. And that's going to be posture. That's going to be where the center of mass is. It's going to be the swing and width of step and where the knees are pointing and elbows are pointing and whatnot. And hypothetically, if I store this in a proper way as offsets in a body space, and that is like a whole other conversation where you store everything related to everything else. I could say I could get what it means to be Alex and get what it means to be my wife out of this motion, and hopefully interchange. But that's like a far, far goal. Right now, what we say is that there is a certain number of poses that you can stylize and then propagate it over the rest of the content. And you can stylize them by hand, and you can stylize as many as you want. And
That's
just going to pick the poses that represent the content well.
So real quick, just to kind of clarify what you're talking about. So you could take, let's say you have a whole data set of like you said, a motion capture session with yourself walking around or doing something. You could have an artist modify some primary poses from that, and then apply those deltas to the whole, maybe change the whole style of the whole session by.
Exactly, right. Mehdi did a very good description and showcase some of his, engineer art results in his SIGGRAPH talk. But the gist of it is we know adjustment layers, right? And we know that adjustment layer, if I apply it over everything, it's not really always going to be good. It's like also classical animator bias, people working with small clips, to them apply it over everything means like 30 frames. That might actually be okay. But if I have locomotion where there's all of this intricate footwork and double steps and cancels and runs and sitting on the chair and whatever else and operating a prop, adjustment layer just won't work on top of all of this, right? Whatever I adjust is going to be very good in some places, and it's going to be very critically mismatching in some other places. Because when I was creating adjustment layer, I chose some pose, I adjusted for that pose, but it's not going to work for poses which are critically different. And so stuff like, zombie walk or hand somewhere else, or just leaning, being hurt. One of the ways to do that is where we figure out that, hey, there is a certain number of these adjustment layers that you would need to create for this animation content, say 10 hours, right? And we would say that if you adjust these 20 poses, you're going to cover everything with degree of error of 60%, for example, right? Pulling out of my thin air here. And, by the way, if you want to adjust 20 more, the degree of error is going to be, 50%, right? So we can actually find a place where it feels like that's the best that you could do. And if you have a good animator, animation director basically does that to animators every day. Vertex Blizzard, right? You know that better than me. Where he says, okay, you need to make this more feminine, and here's what you're going to do, right? You're going to bring the elbows a little bit in. You're going to straighten the spine. You lead with the chest. You're going to do this thing with the walk about the planting. Here, I want you to change that thing, right? So he can describe this. If he can describe it, if he can literally sit and do it, then doing it on several poses is totally exactly what we do by default, right? This is how we sculpt animations. The only caveat there is that if you just say, well, I got this 10 hours of daytime, and so there's a pose at 2 hours, 45 minutes, 17 seconds and 5 frames, adjust that and then adjust that one. It's like makes no sense. You have to jump, and as you adjust the pose, you sort of want to scroll back and forth, and it's not really working. So the way we combat that, and that also happens with the cloth, by the way, because you don't want to simulate 10 hours. It's just stupid. Even if you can, you will never scroll through that. Once we figured out which poses we consider to be critically important, we call them PDP, principal dynamic pose. Principal just speaks to their privilege. Dynamic basically means that, and that is an important part. We store the velocity with the pose. Like we don't see velocity, but it's there. And one of the examples I like to bring up is like I can have two poses which are very, very similar. But one of them comes from walking forward flip, and one of them comes from walking backward flip. And so they're critically dissimilar, but I'm stupid monkey, right? I'm looking at 2D projection of three-dimensional object that is a part of four-dimensional space. And so like, I can only see that much. So what we do is once we identify those PDPs, principal dynamic poses, is we know in the data for each of them what happened right before and what happened right next. right, in the motion itself. And so we have this fancy way of stitching them together into what we call concat reel. As horrible name, but I don't know any better. So basically, we concatenate it. And so if you're looking at 20 poses, you're looking at 100 frames, right? And so they're chained together in one little clip that you can actually scroll through. And as you adjust something, it propagates. So if there was a similar, once I adjust this pose, every time in the data, something similar to that happens, my adjustment layer kicks in, right? So again, I'm some sort of oversimplifying.
Sure.
But I'm going to have one for this. I'm going to have another one for this. And I'm going to have this and this. Even ideally, I would mirror, but we all like asymmetrical characters. And now I got my walk cycle. And if I only use it for the walk cycle, we do it sometimes, and I could just do it in Maya. But when you're looking at this vast amount of content, it's hard. One of the examples that Mehdi was bringing up that I really like is he had a character come and sit on a chair. And if the chair needs to have chair handles higher or lower, well, that's a pain in the butt. I can adjust it on this pose and I kick in this adjustment layer, but then I have to go and in the data adjust the curve. And sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's going to miss a little bit and whatnot. With this Hyperpose approach of sampling this 10 hours of motion, sampling it into 10, 20 different things, you can clearly, you get your walking phases, of course, but you can also get your sitting. And if there's a couple different types of sitting, you're going to get a couple different poses, right? And then as he enters and sits on the chair, it just automatically starts inheriting from a different stylization. And I really, really like that. Now, for now, we're trying to keep it to not be too arrogant and say, well, it's safe to do it on the offline because you can always just go through the data and make sure everything that happened for a good reason.
Sure.
But the goal is to do it at runtime, because why in the world would I store all of these very different styles for my digital humans and work against myself in footprint, work against myself in just my capacity to manage and chain them together. And some of them would be, there's some stats which are persistent, right? Like the character is male or female. Sorry, DEI, that's not what I mean, right? I'm talking about the game, but we spawn a character, he has some persistent properties. Okay, screw male, female, let's say orc. Right, but some of them are transient, like low health. And when he's low health, I actually want him to be leaning a little bit. And some of that could be stamina, right? He's tired. So sure, he has this animation of actually doing something. And Echo is not designed to change the meaning of motion. It's just designed to change the silhouette and telegraph something different. But a tired person would walk a little different. And I like the ability that you can just blend it in or blend it out, right? Without trying to find some sort of transition to some sort of animations. And from that set of animations, you can't actually start running because you never created those transitions and whatnot. Wordy. I know that you understand most of that and probably could have been a couple sentences, but I really love talking about this, Brad.
No, it's awesome. So from your talk at SIGGRAPH, on Hyperpose, you described the PDPs as like almost like a network, because we know the poses leading up to a PDP and we know the poses exiting from that. Yeah. So where you kind of map out the associations between them. So when you edit let's say with Echo, you stylize a certain PDP to have maybe like a more tired or whatever kind of posture. Does it only affect maybe the immediate, like, is there like a vicinity of that pose that it affects kind of thing? Or does it?
Yeah, so this is where the fecal mass actually begins to inherit how would I say it? Radial velocity of the spinning blades, because it doesn't affect stuff in the timeline around itself, right? It affects poses which are in the same hyperpose space. So if it was a left foot step forward, then all left foot step forwards. But we know humans don't do them identically, right? If you had a pose library and you captured and you copy pasted your stuff and you're working with ASM, then they're identical. Sure, it's like no brainer. But there's a ton of things which are similar to an extent. Right. And so this is where our pose comparison really becomes super important, because, yes, not only we know where something came from and where it intended to go. If you and me intended to end up in the same pose, that means that and we could be quite different. Right. But if we ended up in the same pose or came from the same pose, then we become the possible branches. And that's where the whole network with edges and points kicks in. But when similarity of adjustment is basically we find the poses similar to what you edited, and we apply it to them. And they could be like, honestly, it could be a different mocap captured in the studio. You never even heard about that mocap clip existing. That is what I really love about like building everything to scale. You might have no clue that there is somebody in Shanghai who just captured this stuff or just animated this thing. And it could benefit from what you're doing, right? You don't have to know that. That is great because as we are going into this more and more realism, and especially when things like motion matching kick in, the amount of content is such that we cannot parse it. We cannot search it. We cannot, I don't think we should even try to tag all of that by hand. So yeah, I hope I answered.
No, yeah, you did. You did. One thing I think is really, I keep saying this, what is really cool about this is that you use point cloud data, like volumetric point cloud data within the character instead of joint data, let's say. Because every, different characters can have different skeletons or whatever, maybe between different rigs and things. But you're analyzing point cloud data instead. And I think that's really cool because you can analyze maybe you have two different rigs of the similar geometry even, or the same.
And I love that you bring this up because this is really an important part. Like, we are so used to the idea that, well, we're going to have some joints and they're going to have some root. And where is this root? We don't know. Somebody's going to put it manually. Somebody's going to put it between the legs. Somebody's going to project the hips. All of those are uninformed. It's like clicking a finger to the wind. But another really deeper meaning of this physical aspect is that we're trying to learn, why do animators segment the way that they do? What is it that they pick up on, right? And it's not something that everyone necessarily can even explain. They just got gut feeling, and they sort of choose the same places, but why? And so and I know that there's actually a bunch of people doing a very similar point cloud approach. It's more like where we take it. So when we distribute points in the volume of the character evenly, right? Not taking actual topology because you would have way more stuff in the fingers, for example. Sure. You don't necessarily want that. You want it to be even, and then you can assign more meaning to extremities or head, for example. Sure. We would do this per source of motion. So if I have some mocap and then I play it on males, females, and orcs, I actually don't need to redo it for those different characters. It doesn't matter. What matters is that in that motion, certain things happen. Excuse me. And I want to understand what happened there. And so by having this point cloud it's either skin to joints if you're working on joints, or you can inherit from your markers or whatever the heck else, right? The core part is that it's deterministic, that for the same pose, you're going to have the same location. And by measuring this, where are these points are moving, we can understand the properties of the motion that happened, right? We can calculate velocity. Well, velocity comes from acceleration. So we can know acceleration, and acceleration in its own turn comes from the force that was invested. And this is the part that I really, really love, because at the end of the day, we are physical objects. We invest some force to push things around. And this intent, this investment, if you look at multiple cases of this, you can understand what happened in the motion. One of the things I really like is like, you take a walk cycle. Every single point that we can measure, it would have this oscillating behavior, right? If you graph it. because more force, less force, more force, less force, right? And of course, you can see the cadency of the motion from that point. But if I took a point in my left wrist and point in my left knee during walk, they would have the same cadency, but it would be offset.
Sure.
Right. And so if we measure a ton of stuff, then we sort of get like average-ish. And from the get-go, we say we know this is we're simplifying. We know that probably a better approach would be to split body per body parts, but for the love of me, I've never seen anybody put it back together and look good at the end. Not saying it's impossible, just wasn't privileged to witness something like that happening. It's always like you feel that something's off.
Sure.
And so I got to the point where by looking at the curve, I can actually have a very reasonable guess about what happened, because you can instantly pick up that was the walk. Right, you can see the cadence. Oh, here he actually stopped, and you can see that. If you remember, in old days, we used to try to detect footsteps by either measuring velocity of the ankle or measuring when it's lower than certain threshold, and of course, it backfired on dancing and moonwalking and whatever else. And here we actually have this extremely powerful way, because every footstep is us kicking ourselves from the planet. We're investing a ton of energy. And you can see a spike on the footstep that's unambiguous. And it's going to happen in the shuffle too. You're going to see every single one of them, right? I love the fact that we are basically just looking at the animation from a different way, but this is science. And I always think science is something that smart people do, but like we're literally doing science, right? And it's kind of fun. And another interesting thing, if you look at the walk, you can actually see two spikes of invested force. And they are not exactly coinciding, they're there. And one of them is when I start accelerating the foot to bring it forward. And another one is when I plant it and when I push away from the foot that is planted.
Okay.
Right? And you can actually see what starts first. Do I start moving the back foot forward, or do I start pushing myself away? And you can see that happens different for different actors, by the way, or different state. Like fatigued mocap actor, you start seeing the fatigue in his footstep as it's one set of float values. There's very little information in it, and yet you can tell that the guy was tired. And I love this stuff.
Yeah, that's nuts, man. I was thinking, I was watching your presentations, like you've become like a data scientist, like you've found ways to find meaning in lots of data and to visualize that, and then to organize it and use it. Like, have you studied, like, do you study this type of science, like on the side for your hobby? Like, how did you get to a place where you could even comprehend and understand these concepts?
I sure might look as a data scientist, but I'm really not. It's just from the nature of the problems that we set forth for ourselves to solve. You start learning some things, but for me, the big problem is I don't have an education. Like, I was born in USSR of all places, right? And I was never trained to do any of this stuff. I am a management and business administrator. One of my first jobs was guiding Chernobyl Museum and stuff like this, right?
Wow.
And so I had to sort of learn all of the things that I know by myself, and never really went through something like the young people right now benefit from the ability to go to college and take game design class. Now, it's arguable whether all of those classes are useful based on who's teaching them and whatnot, or you can go on YouTube and get a tutorial right now, and I do every day, right? I want to learn something, and but the problem with that is there's a benefit to that. It basically gives me a little bit of momentum to look into things which people classically consider to be solved. And sometimes I happen on something that was missed because, back in the day when the rule was created, the conditions were different. And now conditions have changed, but we're sort of assuming that the rule is still correct. And so I'm sometimes inclined to just venture an area where I figure out, oh, by the way, that
doesn't need to happen anymore. Like there's no need to bake ambient occlusion into diffuse texture would be a very simple example, which I don't claim to be the first to realize. But another problem is that I'm totally oblivious to this huge body of knowledge that we have accumulated. And sometimes I spend like a couple weeks banning on something that is just incredibly hard. And I'm frustrated and I try and nothing works. And then I got it and it works and I bring it and I show it to other people and they go, yeah, that's called linear interpolation. It's been around for like 80 years. And I'm like, ugh. I don't know if I should be proud that I'm able to invent this or I should be ashamed that I didn't know about this, but it happens. Although it's much easier to invent things today. It's like one of the examples that I like to bring up is like you look at Da Vinci was an incredible mind, right? But you look at his drawing of helicopter and you go, it's not going to work. You can't have people run around spinning blades. It's just too heavy.
Sure.
They will never spin it fast enough. And like to my daughter right now, it's evident. To him, it wasn't. He was one of the brightest people in his time, but he didn't have the other context that we have just by daily working with things and watching movies and whatnot. So it's much easier to reinvent linear interpolation, even though it's kind of shameful.
No, that's funny. I think it's weird because as like a technical artist, we come from, we're technical, but we're not scientists. I don't have like a math education or any of those things, but I use
Nah, we're
math all the
kids.
time. We try to sometimes we reinvent the wheel by accident, or you arrive at the same destination that thousands of other people have before you have done, but you just didn't know where to look or who to ask about that. But it's all part of the journey. It's a lot of fun. I just love that you were able to push through the challenges. Because I mean, I would imagine looking at this problem you're trying to solve and say, hey, I realize there's a problem here with animation in games and, state machines and blend spaces. Everyone's kind of going about it the same way, and we're all having the same results from that. But then having enough like mental energy and passion behind that to push you through those sticking points of, okay, like I don't know how the hell to solve this problem, but I've, I know you mentioned working with motion matching and some things like that that had kind of maybe pointed you in the right direction towards the solution. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, or even question is, like, I'm sure there must have been times when you're working on this that you're like, yeah, I don't know how to, like this, none of this is, there's no solution. Like any idea I've come up with is failing or it's not.
All the time.
Yeah. And being able to push through that. So it's like, how can you talk about that?
First of all, they pay me money. So there's very few things I cannot do for the right price, but
good to know.
Yeah. No, I mean, I actually asked myself some things like that just to understand myself a little better. And I did work for some people that I consider to be despicable in the past, but I had to do that. And I was happy to part ways with them eventually. But yeah, sorry, that's not what you're talking about. I would say I think that there is the proper way of doing stuff. And I also think there's not one, but based on the conditions that we have, that the proper way may change. And so if we take 40 years ago, state machines were present. They were present in the 2D flipbook things, right? It was literally a state machine. When you look at one of the earliest Mortal Kombats or Street Fighters, there was a set of things that you would play for idle. It just happened to be images, right? And so you had a state machine transitioning between those image sequences. And that was the right way to do it. And I think somewhere along the way, it stopped being the right way to do things because I cannot see ASM deliver believable digital human. I just don't. It's like, to me, it's like you cannot fly to space in a hot air balloon. It's just impossible, right? It's logical contradiction. And so another problem is like, we try to get closer and we throw more data at stuff. And even if you can wrangle all of this data and have this huge, immense footprint, now you got this, million frames of animation on human, and you're struggling to do it the same for orc, right? And so you go, can we stylize all of this? Can we like ML all of this? But even if you can hit those persistent states, you're going to have a pretty tough time with transient states, right? Where tired or fatigued. And then the worst part, in my opinion, is like state machines, they grow by 10% every year. I'm not referencing any specific game. I'm just making an observation. And so it's hard to understand how things even click in my state machine, because now I want to, I start with locomotion, GTA 3, right? I run around this, I have an idle, I have some hit, I have some death. Simple. Sorry, no offense, but sure. Compared to what we do today, right? And today we have like, okay, so I'm going to have like the 17 blend spaces for different cases, and I'm going to play leans based on some stuff, and I'm going to play look at on my face to look different ways. And even though I seem to have a bunch of systems, they are adding a little bit, but they're not solving the principal problem that if I stick a human, if I watch a human navigate the space, he or she, they're going to navigate it in a way that is definitely not chained set of things. That is, it's like this pose styling, right? Where we hit the same pose every half a second, and you notice this. You can create as many variations as you want, but you will not be able to create variations for all the double, cancel, triple, sidestep turnarounds. So I just think there is this void where we don't have the right answer how to animate characters. And for the love of me, I hope we don't try to fit it with ML solution, because that would be accepting our defeat, right? I think we can reason, and I think we can reason our way to the better answer. That's maybe not going to be all the way there, but it's going to be close enough. And like one of the things I say internally about Hyperpose is that if all it does, say it works absolutely stunningly, it looks on par with motion matching, but all it does is locomotion, then we have failed, because we already have something for locomotion. It's called motion matching, and it's great. Right? And if that's all we get, we have failed. So we're not doing that. We are doing that plus objects in the world. We're doing that plus context of soft collision. We're doing that plus ways of adapting and adding stuff on top. We're doing that plus way of repurposing it for some other types like endo, ecto, mesomorph, masculine, feminine, all of that. It has to deliver for problems which are not classically posed by game design, for example. And so we're like preemptively trying to solve for things. But one of the things that they pay us in character central animation tech is we got to think about what is a AAA game that ships in 2030. And that's not an easy question to answer, because we can, from top of our head, between two of us, I think we can probably come up with 50 answers. But which one of those is closest to truth is that's the finicky part.
Yeah, for sure. Man, do you think any of this technology would be applicable in, let's say, robotics or anything outside of games? Because I think it's really neat stuff, and it's something that I haven't really seen the way you're going about this, and it just seems like there'd be something like that.
I think that just switching to this different understanding of motion is useful, because just by itself, I think sound and valid argument can be extrapolated to a bunch of things. So can motion capture be used for robotics? Yes. right? But to which extent and to which specific robotics? And what if we go to Boston Dynamics and look at their dog and like, is there any benefit? The extent is questionable. But I think just realizing that we do so much stuff that is repetitive without us knowing, and we can, if every single pose you or me achieved in our life, we overlaid them all right now. And we, like those point clouds, I sort of skipped over that, but when we were presented with a point cloud, it's trivial to find center of mass. And it's trivial to say that projection down is the root, which is not the correct way to do it, but that's the way we do it right now. Works much better than anything else, because in this space, pose comparison gives you correct result. But if we just took all the poses we ever achieved, it looks so bizarre. It's not all the poses we can achieve, right? It's like a ragdoll can achieve things which are anatomically possible, but would never be done. And I don't know about you, but you probably did martial arts or yoga where you did put yourself in unexpected poses, or sports. But still, like we would see that there's gaping holes in there that, like, for some reason in our combined 80 years, right? We just never happened to bite our elbow or whatever, right? But the rest, you can sample it. And it does look from the start as this weird cloud. And it's just, it's faulty way to represent something like that as a 2D projection on the screen. But if you think about it, there is a set of things that we do, and we can actually clamp it to however the hell few we want. And so if I can describe the motion in this way, what can I do with that? I think we're just sort of testing the water with Savant and Echo, where we're saying, okay, so let's do something with those samples and propagate it to the rest. It works. Right now, the problem is how do we set things up in the pipeline, and how do we simulate, and blah, 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 blah. But it works because of course it does. We zipped animation, did something, propagated back, know the error, see the error. I know where the error is worse. I can scroll there and I can see it happen. It's very, very robust. Can I use that to figure out the best way for a Siri to project a character on my screen and do a, full body to voice match? Yes, because I can capture somebody. I actually did. We just didn't happen to have something that we're gonna, show publicly. But I capture myself speaking, and I capture amplitude of my voice and nothing else. And later, if I have a new voice coming in with amplitude, I can just take this amplitude as one of the driving factors, because as I navigate from PDP to PDP, I can take into account a crapload of things. And I can also take into account that there's voice cadency happening, and there's a certain amplitude to achieve. And of course, there's like no semantic element even built into that. But I can make someone dance to any music that I want. I can make someone hit the cadency of any speech that I want. So I'm sure there are ways to apply this stuff, and there's only so many things that we can do at first. But I have a feeling that once we, as we keep showing better and better results, more people will find maybe error in our ways, or better way to do this, or new applications we didn't think about. Here's another wild example, right? So like, I really like what people do with Flow 3D and Marvelous Designer and Houdini for cloth. I really like that, because when we do a 3D scan, all of that stuff is rested, and this topology is not very useful to do anything else other than pose in which, like, my folds right now,
It's like a sculpt. It's just like a wax model. That's it.
Yeah. And I'm not even doing much right now, right? But my folds on my t-shirt, they're changing. And we cannot do this with a cloth, for example, in a game, or put hands in pockets. Like, why the hell not? Well, because that's how we built it. It's a static assets, and it only is accurate in the very pose that you hope to never show to the player. So, but as they do that, like people in Substance looked into this idea that there's so much stuff we can gather just from geometry. We can bake ambient occlusion. We can get curvature masks. all of that can help you to create the material that would be more realistic. But one of the things that is still problematic, and especially for stuff like, think about blue jeans, right, is wear and tear, because you cannot just take curvature. But if I know this bunch of poses the character wearing these jeans can achieve, I can actually find out where wear and tear will apply. I will instantly find this crotch area, but also on top of that, I'm going to find the wear and tear on the upper thigh from hands moving around. Can I use that to create a smarter material that will be more realistic? Yes. Again, it's a sort of Boolean answer to which extent is a question. But there's this sort of a bunch of things that we can do if we just think about motion in a different way, and we think about ourselves as a static object which can be sampled, and that's all we sort of do. We are just bouncing balls in this blend space, right? Effectively.
That's really cool.
That's a long-winded answer, and probably yes would suffice, but there's no fun in it.
For sure. You talked about driving or gathering data from audio and performance, like amplitude and things like that. And when you're working with I would say like these models that you're demoing on LinkedIn and YouTube and things of Hyperpose, are you using just directional and velocity information to kind of drive the character through the Hyperpose space, or how is that? Is that like basically how it's working, or?
Yeah, so we calculated positions of points at every single frame. And now we know where they were, and we also know where they will be. So I can actually calculate where I want it to be if I was let go a frame ago physically. And so there's a difference between where I would be and where I am. And that means some energy was invested into that. Mm-hmm. And it's cumulative for all the points. So there's nothing canceling each other out. On spot doing that might not move my center of mass, but force invested definitely shows that something's happening. Yeah, so the route that we found has this offset. And so if there's a pose here in world space of mocap, and here 5 frames later, I know how far the route advanced, right? And so if the route is a combination of all those vertices, it's very robust. It's always going to be in the same place for similar poses. Great. So I played pose A, I played pose B, I played pose C, or rather actor evolved through them.
Sure.
And so if I find out that B is similar to pose S, I know that from A, I can go straight to S. Now, B had this offset in time and space. It traveled a certain amount of units over a certain number of frames. S did the same, right? Should probably pick a different letter, but P, Q, R, S. So S went from R somewhere as well. And if similarity between B and S is high, or the cost of them is low, so to say, then you're more likely than not to find out that they both came from poses which were similar to each other as well. Not always the case, sharp turns and whatnot, but quite often it's happening. So you basically know that if instead of going A to B with known offset, I need to go from A to S, I can interpolate between the root motion. And so I can stitch them together in a way that is practically seamless if you don't allow bad cost combinations to kick in. And this is where this adaptive cost function basically, every time it's time to make a decision, we want to evaluate realm of possibilities, right? And we want to look far into the future, close into the future, and we want to rate them. So if there's a goal in space-time, I want to arrive there in 10 seconds from now. And by the way, I want to be whistling or face palming, which is the case where actually we would request a human to go and tag face palm, but that's not 10 hours, right? It's when you're capturing face palm, I don't think we should try to find that physically. And so, okay, so I need to, I know where I am, I know the full network, and I need to explore that network in a way that at a given distance, certain number of units in, I achieve that desired goal. And by the way, I want to pass the gate of facepalm. And if you think about it, like if we took 10 hours and we got a PDP every 7 frames, it's still million and a half of animation frames. No, 150,000 animation frames. That's still a crap load. So the saving grace there is that those PDPs, they do quite often coincide. And so you can, Michael Butner brought it up at some Ubisoft talk that for motion meshing, about 80% of our data was redundant that we captured. Because it was repetitive. Now, there's a problem that with the way that we captured, and that's where this whole loop scheme comes in about a better way to capture meaningful difference. That changed a lot for us. But still, there is a lot of repetition in motion. So you can actually collapse this stuff. And this is where you don't have to explore 150,000 possible nodes, which geometrically every 7 frames would, it would be a power, it would be insane. You can actually start exploring on only 20 because you can collapse all of this thing into a small ball where a bunch of PDPs just became pointers. And on this small ball, you can even go so far as to just throw it. That's what this concat reel effectively is, right? Where we took a lot of data that you might not necessarily even have seen, and we just concatenated in 100 frames, 200 frames, 500 frames, whatever you want, right? And so this motion through space just happens because that's one of the properties of those PDPs. But on top of the pose with its velocity, we do store where root was, where root will be. And if we happen to switch to something, we can interpolate that root, or we can, dead blend it, we can inertialize it, or whatever the heck else we want to do.
That's really cool. When I'm hearing you talk about all this, it makes me think about, as humans, how we move. Like I'm not thinking like I want my hand to be at 1Y and 1X in space, and now I need to adjust the angle of my elbow to make that work. I just think I want my hand to be over here and grab this glass. Can we is there any plans to maybe apply these concepts to like individual limbs or body parts, let's say? So maybe you're not just driving character position and using Hyperpose to generate the animation for that, but maybe a character, something's coming in, whatever, and wants to move its hand in a certain way.
So to me, that is the part where I even in motion meshing days, I sort of arrived to the conclusion that we are better off taking the full body motion. We want things to be realistic. We want to split it, how we do classically vertical split to control the gun or whatever else. We are losing this realism. Our goal is realism. And so let's just take it all. Let's take the full body and compare full body to full body and end up with pristine data. Now, one of the good things about Hyperpose approach is your number of samples. You can shrink your data tremendously, right? 1 million frames is a lot. 150,000 is still a lot. But if you have a robust way to represent this on 1,000 poses, holy cow, 1,000 frames is what? 130 seconds of animation. Like you can play it on mobile, right? And that's 30 seconds describing 10 hours, right?
That's crazy.
It is. I like I said, I still think there's an error in my math, but if I'm wrong by one order of magnitude, it's still crazy good. And so to me, the pose adjustment, perhaps a part of that needs to happen in stylization, where we are not adjusting meaningful, we're not introducing a new meaning. We're just saying, oh, hello, right? Where it's just a silhouette that indicates, gives some different visual feedback, but it doesn't change the meaning. It's like, we know we can retarget walk into run. We also know we shouldn't, because there's some stuff there that should happen different, especially with a 180 turn where some running might happen even planting the foot on the ground. So when we want to add some stuff and like, maybe I have some gear that I want to grab and it could be located on different body parts. Maybe there's a phone I want to carry and I don't want to have a phone in all my locomotion sets, right? Maybe this character needs to face palm, like player has a button and he's going to mesh this button. You don't know when. And every time he meshes the button, face palm must happen within 2 frames. And for stuff like that, I actually think we should not try to capture it. We should actually find a way to do it at runtime. And there's some mistakes that I made with the whole IK rig thing. Like one of the things I was doing was feminizing by basically like multiplying offset of the pelvis and moving IK targets. And you can do that. But what happens if the character needs to sit on a freaking chair, right?
Right.
Butt is going to wobble. That's not the way. Echo is the way, in my opinion, because it literally verbatim deals with chairs separately. But there are some things we should do at runtime, and they're not just limited to lookats and whatnot. There is this thing that I transitioned a little bit into because it's an essential part, and we call it adapt. I really hate when people say retargeting because I think in the meta retargeting is I'm going to take the FK angle and just reapply it, and that is not it. Now, I know I'm strawmanning it a little bit, but I'm just trying to step away from the word because, in my opinion, it's loaded. But we're trying to adapt motion. And so this is where the stuff comes with some metatypes and masculine, feminine proportions and whatnot, right? And things really get complicated when we're not just uniform scaling somebody, but we're changing proportions because self-contacts are gone. Now, I know that in a classical game we will take today, we will see that there is very little self-contact, and that is a shame. And if I just take a picture of random people on the street, I will see self-contact everywhere. I will see hands in pockets. I will see hands on hips. I will see somebody standing like this, right? Or people touching each other, people touching world, people touching self. So not crazy. Nearly enough. You take random street of some fabulous, amazing game, and you will not see any of that represented. You will see a couple of very canned animations, but you will not see this stuff just happening by nature of people interacting with the world. So to me, if we greet and we want a handshake, I would say probably maybe we would like to capture a number of handshakes. But if I just want to wave to somebody passing me on the street, I don't know in which pose I'm going to be. And so I can create a procedural wave. I can mocap someone and learn from that. But I'm not going to learn like machine learning. I'm going to actually look at what happened there, what happened right before, and how do I replicate it. And so, this is evidently something that we can easily, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to be arrogant, but this is a trivial thing to add. It's much harder to add it well, where shoulders will, the bounce will look natural, not forced, but it's solvable in principle. And I think this is the way to solve it. And so if especially where this body space thing kicks in, and just to explain it a little better, right? If you picture a bunch of points around me, for any single point in there, I can measure distance to my body parts. We can even reuse our mesh, right? This point cloud mesh. And I can say, well, it seems that I am closer to this and I'm further from that. And it seems like it would be reasonable to assume that I should inherit from things I'm close to. So a phone next to the head, right? It's not contacting. Like when we retarget, we have to do it FK or IK, and we have to basically go and blend where it happens, kick in some IK because he touched himself, turn off IK for walk, right? But there's this soft attachment that is not necessarily directed. And the freaking thing is so cheap, I did it on a rig, literally. I pose the hand somewhere, I hit soft attach, and this happens. It's awesome. Cheap. It's very simple, right? We don't do this because I don't know why, right? Or another example is I have an idol, I take a hand and I move it, right? And I move it over 30 frames, sliding over the surface of the body. If I go and soft attach it on every fourth, 32, right? I can then bend this body and it's still going to follow the surface because it's soft attached to the body. It's not attached to a specific joint and then interpolates. It's actually switching how much it inherits from every joint over time. It's a stupid, simple trick. It really works well for things which are sort of here, right? Yeah. It works really well for the weapon that I carry. Add some drag on that, you're getting even more gist. So I don't know if that's like solve all. We didn't even approach to describe the problem space correctly. But for a number of gestures in the space around us, treating them as a body space thing seems to me like a good first step. And generating them procedurally so we don't care about underlying pose, but we take it into account to figure out where it is, also seems to make sense. So if I soft attach the phone here and then I play it on a character with longer neck, the hand's not going to stay there. It's going to move up with the head, and it's actually when it arrives there, right? But if the animation arrived from the bottom, on the bottom it's going to be the same because it was soft attached to other stuff. So body space to other stuff.
Right on. I know we're getting close on time here. I guess one question would be, does Activision Blizzard King plan on releasing this stuff to the public, like in a plugin maybe, or is it going to be kind of more in-house?
I really like what happened with motion matching, right? Michael did such a good job explaining what it is, and he showed his code. And now we see motion matching everywhere. Now, I hope he collects somehow, although I have a feeling he does not. But this company, and I'm not going to represent my employer when I say this, but in my opinion, this company is not really, this group of companies is not really in the business of making plugins for other people to make great games. I think Activision, Blizzard, King are three perfect examples of companies that define what freaking AAA is. In their own ways, right? And we have mobile games, we have first person, we have fantasy MMORPG and whatnot. I'm not saying it's only them, but they're a big part of that. Microsoft is bigger. I cannot claim to even know how many businesses Microsoft has, but that's not our goal. We sort of took things out because I have a feeling that there's a bunch of people going in a similar direction. And I interviewed a ton of people, right? And I've been around, I have a ton of friends pretty much everywhere. There's a lot of people going in the same direction. And in some cases, I think body space, that's nice. Yeah, we're going to try that. We're going to write our own with Blackjack and, thank you very much, right? And they will tell me something, they will go and present to us for us to go and learn from them. And this is how we make things better. One of the sort of bruises I have is from my K-Rig, right? Because we were developing this at the same time with motion matching initial sort of hype. And it wasn't exactly a system that anybody would port. It was more like, hey, guys, why don't we start adjusting stuff at runtime? And here, by the way, is a bunch of examples what we could do. And here's like a dog turned into a horse and a procedural human sitting on a horse. And this is how we can go up the stairs and down the stairs if we predict. And this is what we can do for prop grabbing. So I think to a large number of people, I didn't really tell them anything new. It was more like, hey, look here, there's yummy stuff in here. And they would go, that's interesting, right? And so I don't in any way, shape, or form claim to have inspired control rig people from Epic, but I hope I did because they shipped an amazing thing. And now everyone should be doing that. There's a ton of yummy stuff by making the character fit in the world. It's such a shame that we think we can animate in Maya and then stick it in a different condition and have it fit. No, it doesn't fit. It's wrong. It needs to be adjusted. Maybe it's soft adjustment. Maybe it's just foot planting, but it has to happen. The funny thing is, I think it's like every month, it's been 8 years since I key-rigged, but every few weeks, I have somebody ping me saying, hey, look, I built a K-rig in Unreal. Hey, look, I built a K-rig in Maya. Like, cool, right? And you can actually YouTube this and see some people who put stuff in front of other people and like, hey, here's like this footstepping thing. Great. But if anything, if Hyperpose has a utility about the way to look at stuff, maybe it's going to be just animation compression. Maybe Echo will really be the great thing for stylizing. Maybe the Savant thing for Cloud will really be very useful. Maybe all of them. it's not something that anybody has to just take and port. And I don't think we intend to release any software and then support it. We sort of do it, but we do it internally. We have clients. We have amazing clients with incredible dreams. And not all of those dreams can be satisfied with the tech today. And so to us, that's the purpose of our existence in this company. That's why this company pays us money. We develop something to give our games competitive edge, not just by dumping pixels and polygons. There are other ways of dumping pixels and polygons, absolutely valid, right? There's advancements in physics, in light, in AI, incredible. We do our little thing. We're trying to make animations more succulent. And part of that is going to do with the damage. Maybe it's never going to be working for first-person character because meaningless. But for NPCs, displaying, if their average lifespan on the screen is 2 seconds, then we at least want them to show different things and really help player live the fantasy of we should be disturbed, maybe. But then, if we find a way to make it easier to show what the character is actually experiencing right now. And I'm talking about NPC, right? Being fatigued, telegraphing something to the player of utility. All of that. So I don't think we're going to ship something and support it to everyone and then port it into every engine. But if we do things well and we show that there's yummy stuff there, we put out a crap load of stuff that I would say was not evident necessarily, and maybe that we should hold on to. But I think people would arrive there anyway. And if I describe how body space works, the code itself is not that complicated. It's more about how you fit it for your specific thing that you're trying to do. Point cloud, right? Like I have arrived to a certain number of points that I believe is the best. But just the idea that we can measure points in space and animation and harvest some data from it, I don't claim to have invented it, or rather, I'm pretty sure there's a ton of people who are doing similar things. They're just missing this idea about using the force, right? And that is where a ton of value can be derived from. So, I'm not a software engineer. I'm just a guy who picks things up and puts them together. And if it rolls down the hill, I scream hooray, and I scream hooray when it rolls down the hill for other people. But I'm not going to provide, you wouldn't like to see my code, probably.
Well, dude, you're very humble.
Not everybody is like this, actually. People I work with are really, really good at this stuff.
I'm sure, man. I mean, you're very humble. I would say you do think about things very differently. There's a lot of this momentum or dogma, whatever you want to call it in the industry, that kind of like you were saying, like you just accept things for what they are. This is how we do things. We've been doing this way for the past 20 years. And it's almost like you don't question it, but you seem to question a lot of things. And that's led you to some very interesting solutions for things and ways to think about things. And the proof is in your work, man. I mean, it's really cool stuff.
I hope you're right about all of that. There are some things which are hard because we can logically understand the reasoning and the argument for doing it this way, but we're just gonna not want that. And then there's some things where, we're sitting on this legacy franchise that's been around for a couple decades, and we have to reuse. We're not going to modify the DNA of it, and we want to be reusing when we can. Again, I'm not speaking about any specific game or project, right? I'm just describing a possible scenario that you're not really going to switch to, say, motion matching in the middle of developing next Sims or whatever. But some of us maybe will come up with good ways to do things. There are some really crazy game developers with ideas that should be implemented, at least so we could see that maybe that's not the way, right? But still, just stuff that is unconventional. If we can help them do this, I think we are succeeding with our life. There's one thing, I understand that we're at the end, and I think that's a good thing as a last thing to say is what I call this arcade physics paradox or arcade physics clusterfuck. And that scares me because say we have, and yeah, the gist of it is basically that over the decades that we have video games, the way that our characters behave in the game are completely unphysical. And that is fun. We like that, right? And so you play like Dark Souls or whatever, you have a horse, there's double jump on a horse while climbing an 80-degree incline cliff. And like, there's no way to do it, to show it realistically. And it's actually good that we're not showing it realistically because it still looks, it doesn't break us. But what is a game? Say we have whatever perfect animation system, just stellarly good. Say on top of that, we have an amazing high-level AI that reasons characters around the world, so NPCs are not stuck there playing perfect idle, right? But actually have their agency. All of that is great. Where would we use it, right? And that question scares me, scares the living crap out of me. Because fighting games, probably not. Mortal Kombat doesn't want to have 500 variations of idle. They want to have one, right? Because they want to signal to the player's spinal cord, bypassing the brain, hopefully, that something is happening. Games like first-person shooters, definitely not a playable character. But even for NPCs, you want them to, if they're your teammates or enemies, you want them to very quickly move around and assume strategic positions in the level, maybe, right? So real life is slow, and we don't even realize how slow real life is. And even if we can time warp some things, it's never going to be as snappy, right? So there are some areas where we think we could apply this perfect animation system, provided anybody builds it, but it's also not going to be everywhere. A lot of our games are just not made to be realistic, and we got to be okay with that.
Alex, I appreciate you taking the time, man. That's a lot of.
Thanks for having me over. It's fun.
Yeah. No, definitely, man. I feel like we could talk about this for a long time. It's a lot to mentally digest, and it's almost like a brain exercise for me because it causes you to think in different ways and maybe look at problems with a different perspective and different eyes. So, man, I appreciate everything you're doing and sharing all the information you're sharing and posting everything you post online. It's really inspirational to say the least. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for very good poking questions because it's great, and you do keep me on my toes, trying to think what's the best way. And I apologize, I am a horizontal thinker. I go on tangents a lot, but there's so much yummy stuff, right?
Yeah.
So it's a pleasure talking to you. Thanks for this opportunity.